once again, and welcome to the World Discord Podcast. As you might remember, my name is Brian Endless. I'm one of your two intrepid hosts. Joel, which one are you?
Intrepid? I'm Joel.
Intrepid. I am intrepid. You don't need to be intrepid, but I am.
I had to look up intrepid.
I used cacophony in class yesterday, and none of my students knew what it was.
Yeah.
We were raising a cacophony.
I think it's that Fresca you're drinking that's scrambling your brain.
Yeah, Fresca.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you?
I think we should do a World Discord podcast about the continuing existence of Fresca.
All right. Joel, who are you?
I'm Joel Ostrow.
Oh, thank you. It's the first time you've waited till 45 seconds into.
No, I said it before.
You did not.
No, you just don't listen to me.
We're not.
I don't listen to you.
The listeners now going to go back and listen through the tape. Almost 1 minute. We're talking about ICE and fascism. This is our continuing series on fascism, and we've seen a lot of different aspects that have been coming up and allegations of it in the United States. Today, we want to talk about ICE, in particular, ICE in Minnesota, as the most recent example, and look at how this fits into some classical definitions of a fascist regime and what a fascist regime might do. I think to start us off, I'm going to turn it over to you, Joel, and let you kick it through.
Yeah, I'm not sure that this is not going to be the only episode on our fascism series that we're going to be talking about ICE, because it fits so many of, or I guess it's part of so many of the essential features of a fascist regime, and it serves many purposes. And we'll probably be talking a lot about what's been happening in Minneapolis, but it is important to understand that and to remember that the first incursion, I guess you would call it, of ICE was in Los Angeles, followed by Chicago, Memphis, North Carolina. I forget exactly
New Orleans.
where in North Carolina. Huh?
New Orleans.
New Orleans too, yeah. But this is clearly the most aggressive in terms of size compared to the population of the city, the size of the city's own police and other security forces. So
I think it's important to, when you go through that list, I think it's important to think of it in terms of they were doing some dry runs. Mm-hmm. They were figuring out what was working and what wasn't working. And in Minneapolis, I think the size that you're mentioning is very important because they probably didn't want to do it in too big a city when they started ramping up operations. I think that Minneapolis, sadly, might have been the kind of size they were looking for and the demographics they were looking for and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally agree. But I think that all through, particularly maybe the Chicago more than the LA, given some of the super aggressive tactics here, they were testing the reactions of local and state government. What would be their actions compared to the words? And I feel strongly that Illinois and Chicago and Cook County let down democracy in terrible ways.
But we disagree about that a little bit. Maybe we want to do a future episode on that one and on reactions to fascism, because you and I aren't quite on the same page on that one.
But I do think that everything they're doing is a test of reaction. I think, and the people of Minneapolis have really stood up in a big way, in a major way. Again, if you're thinking about proportion of population, the response in Minneapolis and really statewide in Minnesota is pretty impressive. But
it is. No, it absolutely is. Well, let's get into the meat of it a little bit. One of the things I was realizing before we came on here is we're going to need to make a distinction between plain old authoritarianism and fascism here. And I don't think there's going to be any argument, certainly among us and among anybody who understands the words, that as we talked about in our first episode, fascism is a subset of authoritarianism.
Yeah.
These are the actions with ICE going in and what they are doing in Minneapolis and in all the other cities. These are the actions of a wannabe authoritarian government, a budding authoritarian government, however you want to call it. There's a question, I think, and it's an important one. We shouldn't call it fascist unless we can bring it to fascism and unless we can say this is an aspect of it. So Stalin was authoritarian, Mao was authoritarian, North Korea,
Stalin
others.
was totalitarian.
Totalitarian, thank you, yes. And we made that distinction
Because
too sometimes.
Putin's authoritarian, but he doesn't have this private militias going into cities.
Correct, absolutely. Then I think there are a couple of distinctions that I caught out, and you may have some more. First are the stated goals and the fact that, as we talked about with nationalism, nationalism has these, you've got to have a us and them group. You've got to have the people who are on the outside. You've got to, in this case, have the immigrants and potentially the LGBTQ community. And then when people protest for them, they get lumped in with that group, with that us and them group. So in the US, I think there's a significant element of white nationalism here, of very publicly targeting specific groups. And then I also think, maybe not in all cases, but certainly you look at Spain, Italy, Nazi Germany, when we look at fascism, it was more public groups of bully boys, thugs, public police force enforcing the will of the government, whether it was legal or not, versus a lot of times in authoritarian totalitarian regimes, they get their fear from secret police and they don't necessarily admit that the police are doing it. Whereas a fascist
Yeah.
regime, it's part of it. Part and parcel of it is the very public, we're sending these people out and you will, and they're going to be in the streets and you're going to fear them.
But I will tell you, you know, I was a doctoral student, and before, well, a grad student in the very late Soviet period. In undergrad, studying the Soviet Union in the mid 1980s, before Gorbachev came in, and from the very beginning, I, I challenged professors and never really, for myself, got a satisfactory answer. There was nothing secret about the secret police, Brian. We Westerners, the English language gave the label secret police, but the Soviet population didn't experience anything secret about it. So much of the arrests, much of the execution, there were show trials, so much was public. And the same was true in the Cultural Revolution and in China. Um, the only thing secret about it was, um, you could say, today's behavior of the ICE and Customs and Border Protection folks with the masks,
Mhm.
and shielding identity. Maybe their identities were secret as a way of spreading fear and terror because anyone
Right.
could potentially, you didn't know who was and who wasn't.
So
But the activities were quite public.
now my knowledge of it and where I'm kind of going with this one is when you look at the Nazis, the Spanish, as examples, they sent large groups of people out into the street, essentially government gangs,
Yeah,
to cause terror
yeah.
and to break windows and to break into houses and things like that and to directly harass people. Was that done in the Soviet Union, or was it more you capture people and then put them on show trial, which is my understanding?
More the latter, but like there were explosions during, um, the Great Terror,
Right,
uh,
roundups, yeah.
generalized, where like it wasn't so much smashing glasses, smashing windows and things like that. Like there wasn't a crystal knock
Right.
equivalent. But for example, like during the forced collectivization, uh, there were gangs going out and shooting people, rounding them up in the open,
Yeah. No,
and that
so
also happened in
no,
yeah.
here's the deal. We're proving the point that I kind of made at the beginning. Yeah, we're going to need to show the aspects of fascism here to
Right,
some extent to call it that.
right,
Eh,
because those regimes were. we call them totalitarian. Uh, Fascism, I guess, is a subset because Nazi Germany was also a totalitarian regime.
100%.
To my understanding of fascism, what brought the one of the aspects when it comes to the violence. I think today we're going to try and focus on uh, the Gestapo, the sort of privatized or whatever police force, which I
Right.
think we can call ICE and Customs and Border Patrol here. Um, there's generalized terror, but what distinguishes fascism is the mobilization of the fear around some kind of ethnic, cultural, religious, national
Exactly.
people, right?
Yep.
Whereas, so the reason that we call the Soviet or the Maoist China regimes totalitarian, but not fascist totalitarian, because neither of them directly there wasn't mobilization of the population around the personality cult. The
Right.
mobilization wasn't happening around those are the bad guys,
Right.
or the bad guys that are those is they're not bad because they are Catholic or Adventist
They're
or
anti-state.
Mexican. They right they became targets because they opposed the efforts of the regime to consolidate a
I, I
totalitarian state. Yeah.
I think this is an excellent way to put it. And folks, yes, we are two academics sitting here talking about this, but you can hear this at kitchen tables, at least the kitchen tables I hang out at and online, and in the news too. The questions of sometimes imprecise use of words, and it takes a while for us to even talk through what the definition is sometimes, and even for people who are
Yeah.
understanding of it to talk through it.
And as you were saying that, something occurred to me as we mentioned in the last episode. Like, we're doing this because this word fascism is being thrown around, and the fascists are labeling their opponents fascists,
Absolutely, as usually happens.
form. Why is it important? And largely, probably the people who need to hear these episodes are the people who are not going to watch or listen to them. But perhaps some people who are will encounter those who ought to listen.
Exactly.
Why is it important that we understand the phenomenon here is fascist? To me, it's precisely because of the targeting of, to borrow from the Genocide Convention, a people as such, because of their ethnic, cultural, religious identity. It is so squarely counter to the founding principles, not followed through, we know, but the language of the foundation of this country and the ideals that most Americans thought we were reaching towards.
Right.
We now have a
Absolutely.
regime that is rejecting those ideals that traditionally we have been reaching towards. And in spite of all of our failures, we are a country of immigrants.
Right.
You're here because of immigrants. I'm here because of immigrants. Everyone here who is not a descendant 100% of an indigenous population to North America is an immigrant.
Even they came from Russia and China.
And we welcomed all immigrants because we
Yeah.
were, even if the purpose was heinous, even if we wanted all the immigrants to carry out the manifest destiny to slaughter the natives, right? The idea was anyone can come here. Yeah, right, right. And so what is happening now by rounding up particular ethnic groups, language groups, religious groups, racial groups, however you want to identify it, by rounding up a particular kind of people, by knocking on doors because people look a certain way or sound a certain way, that is so specifically anti-American.
Yeah, absolutely.
That,
So
and it
let's talk
is
about.
fascist, right? So I think it's important to understand why we are using that term and why it's important, why it's so shocking here in the United
So
States.
absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about where this comes from. I think you mentioned important things: populism, white nationalism. I mentioned us versus them focus. This right now is coming out of Donald Trump's populist campaigns. I think we can very clearly say that drove the MAGA movement, that brought the MAGA movement to this. We can take it back 30 or 40 years. This didn't start with Trump in any way, shape, or form.
And
Trump is,
tapping
I
into the
think,
resentment, right? The resentment
exactly.
of
Yeah, he tapped into resentment that had been built
lower
up.
middle class white, not
Exactly.
disenfranchised, but who have lost out, who've not experienced the explosion
Yeah,
of
and what
wealth
has been pushed
from
out in the public by the politicians at the
yeah,
top, by some newscasters, podcasts,
right,
social media, is this idea of a loss of whiteness that pushes for the white nationalism, and it's not always public. Many times it's a
yeah,
dog whistle, so it's the immigrants' dog whistle, and it's
mhm,
the idea that immigrants are doing all of these heinous things, which any rational person sits back and says, no, they weren't eating dogs and cats
no,
in Ohio. That wasn't happening. But that doesn't mean that it didn't push the narrative further and further and further against those people. And we got to the point where effectively the first Trump years were absolutely anti-immigrant. Now it is a more fulfilled, how hard can we go after the
yeah,
immigrants? And I think
yeah,
that shows a shift. So in that first Trump administration, we were looking at border for the most part. There was some inside the borders. It has been a radical shift this time, and it's moving away, I would suggest, from what were the maybe early tests on the borders, and maybe it was that Trump had people who were holding him back in the first administration. That's been well reported by his own people, by the way. This isn't
yeah,
some conspiracy theory. It's his advisors
yeah,
who are
yeah.
saying it.
Former
Um,
advisors, yeah,
yeah, but taking that out, and now I think what we are seeing is a drive for a few things. It is a drive for fear. It's to create a campaign of fear, primarily in big cities, which happen to be blue cities, places that have generally been opposed to the administration, electorally opposed. Their mayors or governors are often opposed to the administration. So it's that push for fear, and it is a push to see how far they can push.
hmm
And this is something that came up in Project 2025. This is something that's been again happening really since Nixon, is the increase in executive power. But now there appears to be a pretty blatant goal of how much executive power can we get away with, and will anyone shut us down? And I would suggest that the immigration campaign with ICE and border control as kind of the tip of the spear is the ultimate example of that we are seeing right now, and it is using these white nationalist stories, these anti-immigrant stories, and then also wrapping up anyone else just in the same way. I'm not calling them Nazis, I'm just making the parallel because a lot of people know it. It wasn't just the Jews, it was the Jews, it was the communists, it was the gypsies, it was anybody who was in one of those groups. It wasn't anti-state, but it was a group that the state was blaming for things and
right.
was trying to place blame upon. So we've got all those groups coming together, and now you move it forward, and particularly in Minneapolis in the last couple of weeks, what we're seeing is the us versus them that was building has now come into it's okay to go after the protesters, even if they are part of the what might normally be part of the white nationalist group. It's okay to go after anybody who protests against these ideological policies and who's out in the streets or just in the way. And it's okay to go after US citizens in their houses. Oops, I made a mistake, but obviously there was something wrong with them. If I made a mistake, let's brush that under the carpet and let's keep going. So instead of going after the violent immigrants, we've seen what, maybe 1% of the people, last stat I heard, that have been captured had some violent record, and the vast majority didn't. I've
The
talked to
vast
long
majority
time.
have no record at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, the only pushback I'd give Brian is um, the operations in Chicago and Los Angeles and elsewhere have been plenty violent.
Yeah.
Maybe not breaking into homes of American citizens and taking them, but in terms of not a violent, using pepper spray, tear gas, billy clubs, rubber bullets. All of that happened in Chicago to people. I'm assuming that you know that I know.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
No, I've got good friends
on
who
a
are.
pretty regular and wide scale. And then, if we can just stick with the physical violence like that. But then also, uh, in a systematic way. And part of the goal is to normalize that violence, to desensitize uh, the the population uh, to that, because if you can desensitize the population to militarization of cities and violence, then the regime can certainly do anything lesser than that it wants, right?
Absolutely.
So because
Yeah,
we
and I
won't,
think it.
once we're no longer outraged by this, what against what can we be outraged?
Yeah, and forget about outrage. There is a significant percentage of the population where, we're going to talk about Renee Good and Alex Pruddy, but take it back to Chicago that I have very firm memories of, and it happened in LA too, where the ICE agents were looking for provocation and taking
Yeah.
the smallest excuses for provocation
Hmm.
to turn them into violence. And
Yeah.
this is where we get into the extremism of policing and going beyond policing. Police in crowd control situations should be trying to tamp everything down and
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah, these goons
restore
should
order.
not have the word police on the back of their vests or jackets. It's really
Exactly.
horrible.
Where
They're
now
not police.
I, I just saw a video of Greg Bovino giving orders to the troops in Minneapolis. Now that he's out of Minneapolis, I think he's pretty much getting thrown under the bus on this one, but we'll see. But what Bovino was saying is, if they touch you, you
Hmm.
are authorized to take any kind of violent action that you want to, and you're
Yeah.
encouraged to
Hmm.
as you do it. If they do anything more than that, we're going to have your backs and we're going to go out and do it.
Hmm.
Is it going to be us or them? Whose city is this? It's our city, ISIS
Hmm.
city. And they're
Hmm.
using those kind of things to rile people up.
Hmm.
But then you see those in the population. So I can't believe how many people, with Alex Pruddy, for instance, talk about, well, if you bring a gun to a rally, you have to expect that you're going to get shot and killed. If you
Or
drive
what
a
really
car,
tickles my fancy is this notion, you're interfering with operations of federal officials. What the fuck then, pardon me, was January 6th, if
oh,
not
100%. Yeah.
violent
No,
effort to interfere with the operations of federal government and federal, officials? We, I want to. Can we talk a little bit about the murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy?
Let's hold off on 1 second on that, because I just want to get one more thought in before we go to that, and because I
Sure.
think that's going to be a big change of subject. I think one of the things that we're seeing here that fits very well with fascism, we've got the extreme nationalism that we've talked about in this setting up the us. It's also anti-individualism,
Oh
and
yeah.
you can see that in interesting ways with what used to be the pro 2A, pro gun people now complaining because someone was legally carrying a gun in
Mm-hmm.
Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it's a
Because
question
rich.
of rule of law.
Yep.
And it is the issue of the rule of law for ICE is whatever they say it is.
Mm-hmm.
And not just for ICE, because ICE officers don't say that. It's people in the administration, and the people kicking all the way up to the president are effectively saying, we can do anything we want to deal with this problem, because this is a problem that is affecting the nation. And it is Kristi Noem having the one of us, all of them, sign on, which for those who don't know is directly from Nazi Germany,
Yep.
and comes out of the Nazi party. I can't imagine the people who put it up there didn't know that,
Of
but
course they
they
did.
are conspicuously not just ignoring, but almost trying to rewrite the rule of law to push it and to test it and to see what kind of results they can get.
Yeah. No, really nothing very well said. Um, it is shocking, and um, I think this is a feature of certainly of all totalitarian regimes, fascist or not. Um, the rational, those who are able to retain a critical, rational, skeptical look at things, um, the hypocrisy, the internal contradictions are so blatant that it becomes confusing, how how people can articulate those directly diametrically opposed views, like the rampant individualism along with the rejection of individualism, as you pointed
Absolutely, yeah.
out.
And we've been
And
setting up a post-truth society since the 80s and 90s, but this is really a peak of it. I hope it's the culmination. I'm afraid it may not be, but it's certainly a peak.
I think maybe this would be a good focus for the next episode, is the role of a
Yeah.
personality cult, because that is the way, that is the only way to make sense of those seemingly contradictory
Yes.
behaviors and make them non-contradictory. But I
And
do
the
think that's
pop
a separate discussion.
Yeah, and the populism is incredibly important here to the
Yeah,
fascist aspect of it. It's necessary.
yeah,
All right, let's talk specifically and bring the
yeah.
incredibly horrific deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy into the equation, and I'll let you get us started on that.
Yeah. I mean, let's not. I don't think we need to summarize. I think we can proceed on the assumption that anyone who is
Yeah,
uh,
awake.
watching or listening to this is well aware of those two murders um, of protesters in Minneapolis um, within a couple weeks of each other. I'm not exactly sure how far apart they were in time. I think it was 2 weeks, maybe a week.
It feels
Doesn't
like a
matter.
week to me, but I haven't looked at the dates, so yeah.
And there are a number of um, repeated observations slash complaints that I hear about this, but I think to me, maybe the most mm, interesting, troubling, there's the legitimate concern, question, and observation that these are not the first two people that ICE has murdered, or
Absolutely
that
not.
this process has murdered. There are children dying in these detention centers, which I think sanitizes what they really are.
Yeah,
I prefer to call them concentration camps.
yeah, and it
There
started with
are,
extraordinary rendition to other countries and people we don't even know what happened to them.
yeah, the kidnapping and deportations. For those who don't know what extraordinary rendition means, because really that's also a sanitized version of what's really happening, I think.
Yep, no,
It
very
isn't
true.
for you or me because we know what that term means, but
Right.
um,
It's a really
the
bad thing. It's when you send people off to be tortured and killed because
yeah,
you can't legally do it here.
but also the murder of people that ICE is purposefully and directly uh, um, targeting, Hispanic, Latino, brown, black. Uh, it's many dozens. I don't know what the number is today, but there's a lot of death that has been happening, and the question is, why is it? Why is so much attention and outrage? And the implication is that it's wrong, that it's white privilege, that it's um, an example of the racism in our society. I don't know that any of that is untrue, but I also, as one who, gosh, since March of last year has been so frustrated by the lack of nationwide uprising against what is happening
Yeah.
to our society. I was talking about this in one of my classes yesterday. Um, to those who are opposed to the direction that this regime is taking this country, we need something to push us over the edge. Right? And to me, it doesn't matter what, you can't predict what a tipping point is. A tipping point, by definition, you can't pin down and know in advance what it is. It doesn't
Right.
matter whether you're talking about climate change or whether you're talking about descent of economic recession into depression, right? Or the little kid who's rocking back on the chair and trying to discover where is the point where I can't stay afloat anymore and I fall backward and hit my head. By definition, tipping points are unpredictable. And
Right.
and if you think about the Arab Spring, which for political purposes the most recent example of this, The Arab Spring was nominally set off, meaning the toppling of dictatorships and the mass uprisings from one country to another, with the Facebook Live um, video of, I think it was Mohammed Bouazizi in
Yep.
Tunisia
Yeah.
self-immolating in the public
Right.
square. But Mohammed Bouazizi was not the first to self-immolate.
Oh
He was
no,
not the
not at
first to
all.
self-immolate in Tunisia. He was not the first to self-immolate in Tunisia for the reasons that he did it, which we don't
Right.
need to go into. He was not the first one to be videoed. He was not the first one whose video was published on social media. Nobody will ever be able to say why it was Mohammed Bouazizi's published on social media self-immolation that toppled a whole bunch of
Right.
dictatorships and led to mass. It just it was his. And so
Right.
and so clearly, like, you and I have been frustrated by, while some are encouraged by the continued protests, I'm frustrated by the lack of mass nationwide protest against these un-American activities. So something needs to wake us up, as I put it, out of our collective coma, to restore democracy here and end this. And I think that, yes, it's true. Maybe it's for all the wrong reasons, but if these two instances help to make the comfortable less comfortable, right? Awareness is appropriate, and I don't reject that attention if that is going to have that effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying and agree. And it was interesting as you were saying it. I was thinking about the analogy that we often use in violent situations of the pot boiling, and we're the frogs in it, and we don't feel it until it starts to boil over, and then all of a sudden everybody notices it at once, which is that Tunisia case that you were talking about, with the one thing pushing it over. And on the other side, we've got, if it's fascism, the fascist regime that's trying to keep the cover on the pot. And if they do their job perfectly, it doesn't boil over. And we don't see anything, and it just keeps getting worse and worse for the people, or we hit a crisis point. And I think that with the Renee Gould and Alex Preddy situation, we're starting to see something that might be that crisis point, in that Minneapolis is really standing up,
Yeah,
and enormous numbers of people going out, really
yeah.
shutting the city down in many ways, as didn't happen in other places. It's hard. We talk about general
Businesses calling for a general strike and executing it. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
it is hard to do it nationwide, and we're going to
yeah,
see if something like that can happen. Because I totally agree. You've talked about it before. It would work. That's the thing
yeah,
we need. But
3.5%.
we don't have what Europe has with all the unions working together. We don't have the people used to it. We don't have the people coalescing. We've
Right,
got too many people living too close to the poverty line who can't take
right,
a day off work. We've
right.
got all the people who are immigrants, who are just brown skinned, who are afraid to take a day off of work because they either might not have jobs or might get arrested or things like that. It's a complicated situation to get to
Yeah.
that point. So that definitely makes it very hard. I
And you
see.
can
I
see
think.
the regime doing what you were talking about in terms of the
Oh,
lid on the boiling water,
yeah,
right? The reaction to Renee Good was one thing, but then when Alex Preddy was murdered, they tried the same thing, and the backlash was worse, really, even from within MAGA.
yeah,
And immediately the rhetoric changed, the tone changed. I worry that the isolation of Bovino and some of the leaks, maybe made up of perhaps the tenuous situation of Kristi Noem, is meant
right.
to put the lid on, but not to
Yeah.
change any of the
Oh,
behavior.
absolutely. And just today they announced a civil rights
Right.
investigation by the Justice Department
Yeah.
against the officers who shot Alex Preddy,
Yeah.
and
Good luck.
that's really no different than the quote unquote federal investigation that was or wasn't done in 10 minutes on both of them.
Yeah.
Okay, they're going to do a civil rights investigation. How can we trust the administration
Yeah.
that said that these are domestic terrorists to do a civil rights investigation of those officers?
It's
It's
also
just
a test
all
case,
in the
though,
wind.
right? Like, this was there. There was violence against, say, the clergy who were protesting in Broadview outside Chicago against
and reporters
protesters, huh?
and reporters.
And reporters, and that group of women who all got arrested. If you remember,
Yep.
I think there were grandmothers who were there linking arms outside of Broadview. Right.
Yep.
This was murder of two white, peaceful, protesting American citizens,
Right.
one a veteran. Um, and
And Renee Good wasn't even protesting.
yeah,
She was trying to drive away.
she was like a rapid response in the car.
Right.
She was blocking the road. I mean, she was, but neither were directly confronting any of the agents, and they murdered them. Right. The regime is clearly also using this as a test case. How can we silence dissent?
Right.
How far can we go in silencing dissent? Like, how long do we have to wait before we do it again?
100%.
Right, in order to keep the lid over the boiling water, right? That even if the murder of Alex Preddy wasn't planned, a murder was planned, I would argue. Otherwise, that messaging wouldn't have gone out to the goons with the masks who have the word police on their backs, and consideration of how they were going to react when it happened. Right. Not if.
We know from memos we know from memos that have leaked that they've been encouraged to violence, that they've been encouraged to draw their weapons, which is the exact opposite of what police are encouraged to do in crowd situations. When you stand in front of a car, you are creating the situation. When you draw your weapon in a crowd situation, you are creating the situation. And this is standard police training. This isn't something that is some extremist theory. This is just what cops are taught, the things you do and don't do if you don't want to make it worse.
Right.
They want to make it worse purposefully.
Well, what they want is what every authoritarian and totalitarian and fascist regime wants. They want us to be fearful and to stay inside and to let the regime do whatever it wants to do without dissent. They want to silence dissent and crush dissent when it happens.
And in this case, they want us to be violent. And that is one of the key things that is sitting out here. It's not just fearful and staying inside. They want a citizen to shoot an ICE agent or to punch an ICE agent, because that then gives them the excuse to move forward. I want to do one more thing, and then we can talk about what this could be leading up to, because we've been talking all this time about what's really happening in a legalistic sense here. Is we've got a regime, a administration that is trying to show that they have no legal and no constitutional restraints. Right. And they are testing that. And the difference between authoritarian totalitarianism and fascism is they are testing it in the name of their ideological cause and in the name of their populism. So we're doing this for the people. When they say the people, they mean the white people in particular, but they use those words and those whistles. And that gets to the argument that we've talked about a couple of times, that we can do anything that we want to. And the most American thing that we can do is stop people from being un-American in our definition and just look at them. They're not American. Look at them. They're a different color. They're speaking a different language. Now, look at them. They're protesting and they're supporting those not Americans. This is all a part of that fascism. This is all part and parcel of the definitions that we gave in the first episode.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It is interesting. Minnesota and Minneapolis in particular have clearly stood up and continue to stand up. We don't really see that elsewhere. Like, we didn't see others standing up when Chicago was home to the most aggressive and widespread actions. That is troubling to me. But we are seeing signs of the people across Europe responding. I saw a report today about by country, and really it's every European country, tourism of their nationals to the United States of America, whether you're talking about Ireland or Denmark or England or Germany or
Yep.
Spain or Italy or the
Massively
Netherlands
down.
or Sweden or Switzerland, like every state down by 30, 40, in some cases 50%
Right. And
reduction in travel to the United States. And then also, um, there is burgeoning evidence, particularly since the murder of Renee Good, and I imagine it's going to accelerate, kind of spontaneous um, social media generated by a couple of influencers, a boycott of major American brands.
right. And we'll see how
And
that runs
there's
too.
evident, like, and naming them: Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Apple,
Right.
um, you know, things like that. American Cars. I forget, there were a couple of others.
Yeah.
Um, and that's not necessarily what you're aware of. A little back and forth I had with a mutual friend of ours, because I've been calling for Europe to boycott and
Right.
isolate our economy is another way to wake up the American people. But it
Yeah.
seems like that
Absolutely.
it's not happening at the level of European governments, but it seems to be happening at the level of
And
people who are
another
seeing
interesting thing
that.
too is it's not just vacationers and tourist visas. This is going to have a long-term effect that again, the certain people probably want, but it's going to hurt most of us. Immigration, legal
Mm.
immigration is going down. And
Who
immigration
would want to
here
come
has been
here?
yeah, immigration has been demonized to the point that people here say, well, who cares if we don't want more immigrants? In fact, we need immigrants to come in. In particular, we've had a steady stream of immigrants coming from, Western industrialized countries who come in and help our economy and do work in
Hmm.
our economy. We've
Right.
had immigrants coming in from poorer countries who do the jobs that Americans won't take. And when all of those immigrants start slowing down, and they all have, that's going to be a hit. That's going to really hurt the economy. Both people to not fill jobs, I mean, also just some things shutting down completely and not happening, plus people not buying our stuff. We're already seeing
Hmm.
that. And these ICE raids are pushing that. It's the tariffs probably that are more important there, but the entire package is pushing it. I
Let
want
me
to go
ask you
on,
this. Can I ask you the unanswerable?
please.
Um, so there were protests, localized and even nationals, against the war in Vietnam. But after the murder of the four at Kent State, the size and frequency and distribution of those protests increased dramatically,
Yeah.
and almost immediately, like within days. So clearly that hasn't happened yet. Do you think it can, and what would you think would propel it here in
So
today?
I'll take a crack at the unanswerable question. First, I think that from the regime, the administration's perspective, they got a really fortunate timing on this being a nasty winter at the moment
Hmm.
for a lot of the country. And I think that's keeping people inside. And if this were a nice spring or summer, we could conceivably be seeing some different things with these same impetuses going on. So that, weather is important on these things. And we've had a lot of cold and snow in the past couple of weeks that have been cutting through, keeping people in. I personally think it's funny. I've got friends from Minnesota, and the Minnesotans throw on a light jacket and get out there because they're very hardy people and they're used to the weather, but most people in the country are not.
But
And
you see icicles hanging from beards
it,
of some of those protesters. So
it's bad there. Absolutely. I don't
yeah,
want to say it's not. But at the same time, what's going to push us to protest more? I'm not sure.
that's why
And
I call for the economic boycott. Because I think if the economy gets crushed and people lose,
yeah,
like, that would be hard for all of us. But like, we seem to be so. This is that contradiction we were talking about before.
right,
Like, it's not affecting me, or I need to work, or I need to pay the rent, or I need to, like, me,
right.
me, me. When it hits the me's, then maybe people will
I'm going to
respond.
call back your story on this, though. We don't know when
Yeah.
the vendor is going to set themselves on fire.
Hmm.
We don't know when and what is going to do it, but we see the build. And the build is absolutely happening. I don't think there's any question about that at all. This ain't going away in any way, shape, or form.
That's a really good That makes me want to rephrase the question. Do you think there's any level of violence that will do it, or do you think it has to be something economic
Uh,
that would get the people in the streets?
yes, I'm going to give the answer.
I
I'm
hate
going to give
freaking
the answer.
academics,
Truly,
especially
truly,
political scientists. They suck.
truly an excellent question and unanswerable. Who the hell knows? And the two things put together, again, something little could happen that could be the trigger because the violence and the economic situation are both building. I think it's all essential.
The problem with the
I don't think
violence
it's
is
going to be
it's
one thing.
scary, right?
It is. It's
Like if they take
horrifically true.
if a couple of those ICE agents at the next protest in Minneapolis take out their machine guns and start and gun people down en masse,
Right.
like is that going to make us more likely to go
Well,
into the
and,
streets or
and
less?
And here's another thing. I'm kind of getting my wish in some ways. Early on, when this was happening, I was suggesting that women and just white groups in general should take up weapons and do what the Black Panthers did in California in the 1970s and sit on the Capitol steps with their weapons. Now we've got a new Black Panther Party that's been in the news that's looking at doing
Yeah,
that. This is a legal thing in places where it's legal to carry weapons and to do it.
stand your
And
ground.
in a technical sense, the police should not shoot at you for carrying weapons. But this is one of those be careful what you wish for because it may happen. I could see that happening in a rational world. The police take that as we need to back down and look again and see what we're doing. We're not living in a rational world right now. And frankly, if the administration gives a command to follow that with violence, it's going to be bad, and there'd probably be a lot of violence and blood on both sides, and that then would give the administration excuses to crack down even more. And
Yeah.
then we have the eventual question that you've asked many times, and I know you're pissed off about it in Chicago, and Minneapolis is doing the opposite. What do the police do? What do the local and state police do? What does the National Guard do if they're called in? I'm not sure how many people have seen, but the Minneapolis police have orders to protect the citizens as opposed to protecting the ICE officers that are there. Chicago had orders to stand in the middle and to not take sides and to prevent violence from happening. We'll do that in another episode, I think, so we don't have to get into it here. But that's another difference. And I have said from the beginning, and you have said, we need the police to start protecting the people. And
Well, we need law enforcement to enforce the law.
exactly,
Right?
100%.
Because the
Yeah.
courts, like, what did that extremely the Scalia, Minnesota judge who the regime is now calling, a radical activist judge.
Right.
Like, what the hell? Identified over 100 different ways that the regime has violated court orders. That is in
100%.
contempt.
So it's violating.
But it's law enforcement's job to enforce those laws, to
Yeah.
enforce those court orders. It's not happening.
It's violating court orders, and it's even going up to the Supremes with the
Yep.
ruling that ICE can go after people because of the color of their skin.
Mhm.
Now let's be fair and let's go take that ruling in context. There was a federal court that said that they couldn't use those factors and that ICE was put on hold. And then the Supreme Court said, no, we're going to stay that motion until we can hear it.
Yeah,
so they didn't
right. They
formally
haven't
say
ruled
that
yet.
Yeah, they haven't ruled that you can openly use racism. But they
But we know
supported-
how they're going to rule.
Right. They supported a ruling.
There's
that says you can
no
openly
doubt
use
how
it.
this court is going to rule on that. Right?
And that's
Which
that
is a big
is
problem.
that is part of what happens when the law just goes away. What
Yeah.
happens when we have effectively no constitutional constraints,
Yeah.
as I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
Hey, let's get into this one step further, and maybe I got two things I'd like to talk about before we finish. The first is, where is this all leading? Because this isn't about immigration. This isn't about protests. And I'm with many other people who look at this from the perspective of understanding how these things go. And I think this is about 2028 elections or 2026 elections and 2028 elections. And this is about giving the administration opportunities to both suppress votes and potentially to affect or forestall some votes. I don't know that they're going to
use
shut
violence
down voting.
to prevent people from voting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
potentially.
anyone who is, I don't see any justification for even talking about the midterm elections as holding any kind of legitimate hope that should be the focus of anybody's response. Just look at what's happening in Fulton County now, right? Look,
Mhm.
it is obvious. And then the court just ruled that Virginia can't redistrict, but
Right.
Texas could redistrict. That's interesting, isn't it?
Mhm.
Um, to expect that any of the traditional institutions are going to save us is there is, to my mind, there is no justification, there is no argument that can defend that position given the consistent and global failure of all of our institutions, except for some of the courts. But without law enforcement, the courts have been rendered toothless. I don't see elections saving us.
Here's one where we somewhat disagree, and I'd like to encourage everyone to call the Cynic hotline. That's 1-800-JOEL's a Cynic, and to take that into account. Doesn't mean he's wrong, but I do think that you are more cynical than I am, certainly, and that we need to be. I think there's a significant chance that what you're saying is going to happen. I also think that there is a reasonable possibility that enough people are starting to stand up that the vote may just be so overwhelming that it will be hard to skew, even if there's suppression. I think Heather Cox Richardson just did a big piece about this.
All of
And
her pieces are big. She really needs to
it's true.
shorten those things.
It is true. But she is more on the positive side. She's almost the shining light to your cynicism. And I'm somewhere in the middle on those, where she really thinks we've hit a turning point. I don't see the evidence for that. Is it possible? Yes. You can't tell those until they're in the future. But I see a lot more people active. I see a lot more people engaged. I see all of the elections that have happened since since the last election have been moving in the opposite direction from the Trump MAGA victory, with people in former red districts and purple districts getting a lot more votes. I'm not a big Democrat supporter, but it's important to fix the problem that we have right now, which is going to elections are our next big opportunity to do that. I think just Democrats haven't done a great job with it in the past is my problem. But is it a foregone conclusion that this is done? No. Are we going to continue in this direction if people don't keep moving and keep rising up and keep getting stronger? Yeah, we are. I think one of the biggest things that people have to do is we need to stay active and stay talking and stay in the streets and increase those movements to the greatest degree possible. Or I'm going to agree with Joel, and we're going to go in that cynical direction, and it's going to get more and more likely as time goes on. I still think that there are possibilities out there. So that's a place that will differ on this one.
All I want to say in response to that, and well, I'll say this personally. Please don't take this the wrong way.
Uh-huh.
My voice has been routinely described as being out there since September of 2015.
Yeah, I have to. So I understand.
I was calling the Republican Party the party of death during the debate over the Affordable Care Act.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me now that it's not the party of death.
Yeah.
I've been calling MAGA fascist, as you know, as we talked about in the last episode,
yeah,
for the last, 7-8 years at least.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. If there were to be free and fair, normal American elections in November of 2026, there's no doubt what the outcome would be, and the Democrats would hold a huge majority in the House and a majority in the Senate. That is not my argument. My argument is there either won't be elections, as dear leader continues to threaten publicly, or there will be not just suppression but violent prevention of either people voting or of accurate count of the votes people cast. That is what I am foreseeing.
So I want to freely admit I've known Joe a long time. He's been a cynic a long time, cynic meaning that he doesn't agree with the mainstream. He has been right a significant amount on this. I want to give you full credit for that. I'm also going to say that even a broken cynical clock can be wrong once or twice.
Sure. And nobody hopes that I'm wrong more than I.
Yep, absolutely.
You know?
No, and so I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to finish
am
with
worried,
one thing.
and you see, I am worried about mass
100%.
bloodshed, and one reason I warn about mass bloodshed is because I'm worried about the potential for mass bloodshed.
Yeah, you're a doomsayer because you care and you see doom coming.
Yeah.
I want to go one more thing, and I am always very careful with my language on this, and you're a little bit less, but I think you're careful too. Are we looking at the brown shirts and the Gestapo here? Because a lot of people use those words to talk about ICE. I'm going to give my perspective. You can give your perspective. Maybe we'll close with these things. I do not want to say that ICE and Border Control are the American Gestapo, that they are the brown shirts. I will say that if you take everything from World War II, from the 1930s to the end of World War II, in terms of the way that Hitler's groups, youth groups, Gestapo, brown shirts worked, it is being duplicated here. So whether you say they are, whether you use the word for them or not, I don't like to be calling people, Hitler, because there was only one Hitler. But at the same time, they're using the same tactics. They're doing the same things. They're pulling from the same playbook.
They're using the same language.
Exactly. I can't imagine that for some of the
people, they wear the same overcoats, Brian.
Yeah, it is an exceptionally problematic parallel, and we can't not talk about it because we're supposed to remember history so we don't repeat it. And I think that's a big part of that.
Look, if people, we are the United States of America in 2026. We are not Germany in 1936. Yeah. Okay? So if you want to put an adjective in front of it, American Gestapo, fine. It's not the Nazi Germany Gestapo because this is not Nazi Germany.
Right. Exactly.
So, but it's not a secret police.
Right.
It's not the NKVD because it's not a communist or a Stalinist police.
We can call them the American bully boys if we want to. That might do it.
They're worse than that, though.
Yeah.
Because they're murdering people.
Yeah.
And again, the burden of proof is on anyone who says that the bulk of those who have been hired over the last 10 months are not people who received pardons.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, not just people who receive pardons, people who are totally unqualified, people who are violent, people who are white nationalists, people who may be part of Proud Boys. All of these things, Proud Boys, a domestic terrorist group, according to definitions. All of these things are entirely possible, and we don't know because we don't know who they are and who the people are.
I would argue we do know who they are. Until someone proves that it's not them, we do know who they are.
Yeah.
Because look at what they're doing. Look at what they look like.
Yeah.
Compare the images. Some have already been identified through facial recognition from January 6th to on the streets now with, weapons of war. Yeah. I mean, if you don't want to call them the Gestapo, don't call them the Gestapo. What do you want to call them?
Right. It's a name that's going to have the same meaning in a lot of ways.
It's going to, yeah. It's what they are and what they're doing and what they're saying. That all of that is what matters.
All right. It's you want me to have the final word, or do you want it? I give you the choice.
You can have it. I'm out.
Joel's beyond it. We'll get him back for next week. Thank you for joining us, folks. We're going to keep going. Fascism is sadly a word that we need to
in vogue.
Wow. We're popular.
Yeah.
Who would have known in the worst possible way?
Yeah.
We're going to try to keep bringing definitions. We're going to try to keep bringing discussion to it and talk about all those topics that are in the news. But instead of bringing it for 1 or 2 minutes, we're going to take 45 or an hour and go into some depth. If there are things you would like to talk to us about, get in touch, comment on our posts, listen in your various podcast places, spread it out to people. Thank you, David, for producing. And
Thank you, David.
we will see you next week.
We'll see you next week. Thank you, everybody.